This is the special Easter reading this year from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. John, chapter 20, we read the inspiring account of Jesus' resurrection. The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre. Then she runneth, and cometh to Simon Peter, and to the other disciple, whom Jesus loved, and saith unto them, They have taken away the Lord. Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews, came Jesus and stood in their midst, and saith unto them, Peace be unto you. The resurrection of Jesus, doubted by many, but affirmed by those who were close to him, was a miraculous event. It was a miraculous event, though one not unique in history. For many great saints of other religions have appeared to their disciples after death. Sometimes their appearances have been, as that of Jesus was, in flesh and blood form, and not only in vision. Paramhansa Yogananda relates in Autobiography of a Yogi the account of his Guru Sri Yukteswar and his resurrection after his earthly passing. Miracles of this type are revealed only rarely to the masses, but accounts of them, related by men and women of reputed truthfulness, have inspired many devotees with faith in the reality of subtler than material states of existence. Resurrection, Yogananda explained, means transformation, ultimately, from any lower state of being to a higher one. Worldly consciousness cannot imagine such transformation except in terms of perhaps an improvement of the present mess of pottage with addition of new flavoring. Divine consciousness, however, is capable of taking the base metal of worldliness and transforming it into the spiritual gold of divine wisdom and love. In keeping with this truth, the Bhagavad Gita in the 9th chapter tells us, Ah, ye who into this ill world are come, fleeting and false, set your faith fast on me, fix heart and thought on me, adore me, bring offerings to me, make me prostrations, make me your supremest joy, and undivided unto my rest your spirits shall be guided. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Well, good morning and a happy Easter to everyone. I couldn't believe the driving rain we experienced this morning. I was thinking, here in the Northwest, Easter ought to go by according to the weather. I mean, yesterday was spectacular. But we're even-minded yogis all. The lesson of the crucifixion and the resurrection is, of course, well, about 2,000 years old. And I think, for me, today, I feel inspired to talk about something a little bit more personal, a little bit closer than 2,000 years ago, a little bit more in our experience rather than how many of us have had visions of Jesus Christ. I don't know, but how about the here and now? For indeed we live in very interesting times. Whether I look around in the news or I look around at my friends or look inside at myself, it seems like everybody's in transition. There's just nothing stable anymore. And that's probably, in some ways, a good thing. We need change. We need change for the better. But what I want to share with you is the lesson of the resurrection, the joy of the resurrection, the celebration of the resurrection, and of Christmas and such holidays, because the great ones remind us in every age from time to time that the world is not what it seems. we are blessed to have the endorsement of our religion, which is science. Science, our religion, tells us that indeed things are not what they appear to be. And so we're fortunate in that regard. We don't have to fall back merely on ideology, theology, and mere belief. We already know that things are not what they appear, but we don't know how it affects us. What is its meaning? We look out at the heavens and the stars and the billions of galaxies, and thus far in the 20th and early 21st century, our only conclusion is, well, I guess it doesn't mean anything, does it? I can do what I want. I can exploit the earth, be greedy, and et cetera, et cetera. I can retain my tribal consciousness. If somebody doesn't hold forth to my religion or my color or my gender or whatever it might be, then they are my enemy. We see that around the world now, armed with weapons, as it were. We need a change. The message that we are children of God, that in our infinite variety of our appearance and our likes and our dislikes and the way we've been brought up, we are underneath it all one. Now, I have lived at this point 65 years, and I've been repeating to myself all week, I'm 65, because I don't believe it. Okay, my body's 65, but we came back from this lovely vacation. Padma and I were gifted a vacation to Hawaii to celebrate Padma's 65th. And there we were on our boogie boards with the 12-year-olds out there in the waves having a ball. I didn't feel 65. But I came back not so much feeling 65, but looking around at my life and saying, I'm 65 and I'm still doing this or that and so forth. It's time for a change, buddy. It's time to grow up. And that was my message to myself. But I have seen in these 65 years, most of which have been lived in spiritual, intentional community, I have seen that even despite our meditation and spiritual practices, our selfless service, our devotion, these things that we aspire to, which, let's face it, we're such a tiny minority. And when I say we, I don't mean members of Ananda. I mean spiritual seekers everywhere. We're a very small percentage of people. And yet what I see is that individuals like me, like you, struggle with a kind of a cancer, a kind of a disease. It's like we don't believe the experience we have in meditation. We don't necessarily fully endorse or integrate or believe that we are children of God. I find I've seen people leave the spiritual path out of discouragement. Self-doubt, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, is, well, he didn't use the word cancer, but self-doubt, self-doubter rather is what he said, is the most miserable of mortals. If you don't have faith in yourself, if you don't have confidence in yourself, if you don't believe in your own goodness, potential for goodness, then you're not going to see it in anybody else. Yogananda said that those with inferiority complex are no different than those with superiority complex because they're two sides of the same coin of the ego. I've often seen that those with a very critical mind, and I include in that far too many devotees than I'd rather think, but when I see someone with a critical mind, you can't go around beating yourself all the time. You need a vacation. So what do? You flip it and you start criticizing other people. It just doesn't end. Meditation and yoga and satsanga, meaning association with people who try to live that way, is in fact the way out. The resurrection of our goodness, the resurrection of our happiness lies within us. This is the message. Now, Yogananda, I don't remember the year, but before he came to America, probably in his early 20s, he took a trip to Japan. His old elder brother was about to die, and I guess in some way he felt to absent himself from India because in his presence he might call on Divine Mother to keep his brother in the body, despite his karmic time was up. And so he went off to Japan. I don't think he was all that impressed by Japan, but spiritually speaking, mind you. But nonetheless, it was on that trip that he returned to India with the theme of his life's work. In Sanskrit, that theme is one very long word, taken from ancient India and expressed clearly and so forth by the great reformer of Hinduism, the first Adi Shankaracharya in about 700 AD or so. But he had the realization taken from Shankaracharya, with whom he had a very special, though he did not explain how special, relationship. You remember he went into Samadhi when he saw the Shankaracharya temple up in Srinagar, up in the Himalayas. And he came back with a one-word theme, which was his life's work. Sat Chidanandam, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss, was Shankaracharya's description of God. But, you know, yesterday I had the privilege of doing something that is very deeply meaningful to me, given who I am and my upbringing and so on and so forth, which is a class on Yogananda's mission to help us understand the Bible and especially the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. And one of the most inspired passages to me, there are many, I admit, but one that I return to again and again is the question that Jesus posed to his disciples. After addressing the crowds with this parable and that parable and on and on and on, they were alone together. Maybe they were sitting around the campfire, I don't know. And he asked his disciples, "Who do men say I am?" Now, Jesus' English was rather poor, and in fact, he said whom, but we'll let him go on that point. Who do men say I am? Not only did he essentially reveal the belief in reincarnation, but that was, of course, beside the point. Because I've said repeatedly over the years, that the question isn't really about Jesus Christ. The answer to that question is the answer to the question, who am I? My spiritual path took me to India in my 20s, and specifically, I was searching, inspired by a search in secret India, and I went to the ashram of Hriman Maharshi in southern India and climbed the holy mountain of Rockula there and meditated there in the caves where Hriman Maharshi had been. He was no longer in the body by the time I got there. Hriman Maharshi's famous dictum, his spiritual path as it were, was based on self-inquiry. Like the Greek, know thyself, who am I? And so it is that Yogananda, in attuning to this question of who am I, made for his life's work the secret of happiness. Ananda put together some years ago, not many years ago, a wonderful book I'd like to recommend to you. We do a class on it about once a year, but it's called How to Be Happy All the Time. And I highly recommend that. But you know what we're seeing now? We're seeing studies on happiness. You see, people have tuned into the fact that it isn't out there anyway, and it's not going to be found through theology or belief or even metaphysics, as far as I'm concerned. We want happiness. He said his theme, getting back to his theme goes like this, not just the Sanskrit word I've mentioned, but his theme for the first book that he wrote, The Science of Religion, was everyone is seeking happiness. Everyone is wanting to avoid pain. It's very simple, very practical. And meditation and yoga is, if anything, practical. Atheists can practice it with permission. I love that story Kriyananda would sometimes tell about the atheist he met in Australia, and how the atheist came up to him and said, "What do you have to tell me?" You know, he was, talking about God and whatever. And so Swami Kriyananda didn't miss a beat, and I've seen him do this so many times. His ability to tune into whoever was there in front of him and respond from his center to their center without access to theology or the politically right thing to say. In fact, Kriyananda was known for not being necessarily politically correct, but being ruthlessly honest. In any case, he said, well, sir, if you can imagine for yourself your own highest potential, would that work instead? And he said, that works for me, Mike. And off he ran. And so, yes, this is a practical teaching. But the self-doubt that we inflict upon ourselves largely comes, or is largely manifested in the practice. And this is where being in satsang, being in a sangha like ours, or especially in our communities where you live together, but in any case, everyone does it, which is our tendency to compare ourselves to others. This is the cancer that eats at the heart of our devotion, at the heart of our sense of well-being, faith in ourselves and goodness in ourselves, which is the prerequisite for finding goodness in other people and faith in life. What to mention faith in God? To reclaim our sonship, our kinship, as children of the infinite, as children of joy. Ananda means joy. Our motto is joy is within you. Is it in here somewhere? No, I guess it isn't. Well, it's outside, that's right. Isn't it, Willow? It's out there on the front door. As you walk in, joy is within you. This is the teaching for the age. But we have to personalize it. We have to make it real. Because if we can't find joy and happiness in ourselves, the rest of it's just details. How many people I have seen at the top of their game, top of their form, top of their field, I don't know, whatever it is. They're either talented, beautiful, or wealthy, or you name it. All those kinds of things. Are they happy? Like Jan Fleming said at the top of his fame. What do you think about fame? It was fine at first, but... Or Howard Hughes, anybody remember that old son of a gun? At the end of his wicked life, he was asked if he was happy. Nah, I ain't happy. One time Yogananda met a guy who, he said, I'm filthy rich. I'm disgustingly wealthy. I'm disgustingly healthy. Yogananda said, are you disgustingly happy? No. It's happiness that we seek. Will you ever find an unhappy person in someone who is genuinely unselfish? No. I don't mean the people who do it for approval because they're expected to, or that kind of thing, codependent kinds of serviceful, much of which is far too much. That's one of the banes of people also of high-mindedness, is they are what we Catholics used to call scrupulous. They do things because they're supposed to, right? Again, when you see in the lives of the saints, and when I mentioned Kriyananda, who would just be himself, that's one of the greatest things I admired in my friend and teacher, Swami Kriyananda, the example he gave us. He was always himself. Padma, who did the publishing for so many years, and being around that in my own way, so often we would want him to give a talk on this, or write a book on that, or go to there, or this conference, because it was popular, or, you know, it would help. Well, it would help the work. It was all good stuff, nothing insincere about it. He would not do anything unless he felt that inner sanction from his guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, our guru, unless he felt that inner sanction. When he started writing a series of books called Secrets of Happiness, Secrets of Love, and so forth, we were all a little bit astonished. I mean, they were actually very successful, but putting that aside, you don't know that in the beginning. Putting that aside, there was a number of people, members, who thought, oh, these are just cheap shots, you know, and little sort of aphorisms and sayings with no real weight to them. Well, not only is that not true if you study these things, but Padma and I discovered some years later that Yogananda wrote precisely those kinds of things in his magazines in the 20s and 30s, a little thought for the day. Kriyananda never said, well, Master did this, so I'm going to do this. He just felt the inspiration from his divine attunement. We cannot overcome our self-doubt by simply bragging, boasting by the superiority solution. We can only find it in the depth of calmness with which comes the perspective to see ourselves in proper relation to others and to life. Kriyananda's autobiography is called The New Path, and he tells of his his college friend Rod. And the story, Rod was very self-involved, like we all are. And in high school, this was before they met, in high school, one time his mother said something very wise for a mother. Mothers aren't always very wise. But she said to him, and he was sort of paranoid, always worrying about what everybody thought. And she said to him, Rod, nobody really cares that much about you. You're not that important. How many mothers could say that to their children? Not many these days, I'm afraid. Because as egos, we're completely unimportant. We're not going to live very long. We just had a good friend of ours, a dear friend here from Seattle who served in other communities, leave at a relatively young age, 60s, that sort of thing. And life is short and unpredictable. No, we're not that important. The jobs we have are not that important. The talents we have are not that important. But the consciousness we possess, the ability to smile, to be gracious, learning to behave. Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's guru, is such a wonk, a mental, intellectual, abstruse wonk that the one book he wrote, even Yogananda, his disciple, couldn't figure it out. Suryadas does classes on it. We pretend that he knows what he's talking about, but it's so abstruse. But yet his teaching was simple. He said, learn to behave. When we behave rightly, then not only will we reduce the criticism level that comes at us, but they crucified Jesus Christ. He was fairly blameless, I'd say. The rest of us who are nowhere near that are ripe fodder for criticism. So get over it. Sri Yukteswar told Yogananda, if somebody criticizes you, be even-minded and say, well, maybe you're right. Just let it go at that. And then further, investigate for yourself. Introspect, well, if they're right, then maybe I should change. Maybe I should do something. And if they're not, and most people are wrong most of the time, then let it go. How many people? Criticism is the litmus test of maturity, the litmus test of spirituality. And that's why the great ones get persecuted, as Jesus promised his disciples. You will be persecuted. Anyone who sticks his head above the water and does a good deed, no good deed goes unpunished, they say. You have to expect that if you're going to lead a life of courage and confidence and creativity. And we need that. But the essence of it gets back down to happiness. So as we celebrate the joy of Easter, celebrate and affirm within yourself that happiness is there, that you are a person of goodness, Godness. Goodness is just God with two O's, I think. Anyway, the last time I checked my spelling. So make that your affirmation. Make that your life. Determine to be happy under all circumstances. If you read the lives of great people, most of them are filled with various and sundry disappointments and failures. Gandhi, King, etc. Yogananda tried to start schools, didn't work. He tried to start communities, it didn't work. But he carried forth. He set for us, his disciples at least, an example. And so we've started communities, we've started schools. He gave us that seed thought. It wasn't a failure. It just wasn't the right time. And his time was short. He left us in 1952. So failure isn't that important. And I'll leave you with this last thought. Something Kriyananda often said to us in the doldrums of our self-disappointments. He said, I understand. He said, you're doing the best you can. Happy Easter.